So this is a joint webinar between ClearBox Consulting and Fresh Intranet, and I'll let Sam Marshall and Chris O'Brien introduce themselves respectively.
Hello everybody, I'm Sam. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. Today we're going to be talking about SharePoint hub sites. It is a new and to me a really interesting topic. A lot of our customers are talking to us about it. At ClearBox, we specialize in digital workplace and intranet strategy. So although this particular webinar is about SharePoint, we are vendor neutral. We don't sell any products, but we're there to advise and be a partner for companies who maybe have an old intranet that they feel should be doing better, or really want to step back and look at their entire digital workplace and say, for example, where does Office 365 fit in? What tools should we be using? And how indeed does that fit with things outside the Microsoft world, such as ServiceNow and HR applications? I'm joined today by Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Chris O'Brien. I'm Head of Development at Content & Code. So Content & Code are an Office 365 and Microsoft partner in the UK. We spent a lot of time around the intranet space, and in particular, building intranet and document management and collaboration and team working solutions. And out of this has come our Fresh product. This is a ready-to-use intranet solution based on Office 365 or on-premises SharePoint, where it's basically the best of all our learnings in recent projects and recent work. And it brings together a lot of things in Office 365, including integration with the graph and lots of tools that people find effective.
Fantastic. And Fresh and ClearBox know each other because ClearBox do an annual report that looks at in-a-box intranet tools for SharePoint like Fresh. And at the end of this webinar, if you stick with us, we'll be offering a discount code on that. But before we get into it, we wanted to ask you a little poll to see where you're up to with your experience of using SharePoint communication sites, so not hub sites, but communication sites, because there's a strong interplay between the two. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen now with a range of options from we're using them extensively to we're not even on SharePoint yet. If you just go ahead and click and tell us where you're at, and that'll give us a sense of how to pace this webinar. I'll just give you a few more seconds, and when we've got a fair number of responses, we'll flip over and show you what the stats look like. Are the answers flooding in, Wedge?
Yes, we're at 70%, so I'm going to flip over now if that's okay.
Yeah, it's a fast-paced webinar. There's no time for too much thinking here. And we should see the results, I think, come up. There we go. So, quite an even spread then between a small number of comm sites, just piloting, and we use SharePoint Online, but we don't use communication sites. So, relatively new, I guess that's what we'd expect. Chris, how does that reflect your experience from what your clients are doing with communication sites?
I think that's about spot on, to be honest. So we've got lots of clients talking about communication sites and some that are using them to a certain extent, but probably not mass adoption yet.
And I think, but particularly for this webinar, we're aiming it at intranet manager practitioners. And if you're heavily into the Microsoft world, it feels like communication sites are old news yet, but they really aren't. I mean, a lot of established intranets, they're still using publishing sites, and the opportunity to flip into communication sites, it's not an easy matter, is it? And I'm wondering, indeed, some have been waiting for hub sites as the bit that makes them a bit more practical.
That's right. I think slowly but surely there's more things that are coming that make communication sites usable, and I guess we'll touch on this later in the webinar.
Yes, indeed. All right, so back to the slides, if we can get those up. So the first thing to talk about is what indeed are hub sites. Sorry, no, I'm jumping ahead. Agenda, yes. So we're going to talk about what hub sites are. Chris will be doing a demo of what hub sites can do and talk about their capabilities. We expect there'll be quite a few kind of introductory questions at that point. So we'll break for Q&A and take any questions that have come up then. Then we'll move on to talk about when to use hub sites versus communication sites, team sites, publishing sites, and so on. And lastly, we'll talk about recent announcements from Microsoft of where all this is going, and that question that I get asked an awful lot, which is, does it mean we don't need an add-on product anymore? Can we build an entire corporate intranet or corporate portal using hub sites? And then we'll leave time at the end for a second round of questions. So what are hub sites? At a basic level, they do three things to help pull other sites together. So they're not a particular kind of site on their own. They are an adaptation of either a team site or a communication site. But when you turn it into a hub, it gets common navigation. So you get a persistent menu bar across all the sites associated with the hub. You get common branding, and you get common search. So if you have 7 sites all connected to a hub, when you search in the hub, it will also search across those other 7 sites. So Microsoft talk about it being a family. It's a way of taking separate independent sites and bringing them into a family. Why would you want to do that? Well, if you've been using SharePoint for a long time, you'll be aware of this idea of site collections and site hierarchies. And it used to be that if you had sites within a hierarchy, so a range of subsites, then you had the option of automatically making the menu reflect the subsite. So if you added a subsite, it would appear in the navigation of the parent site. Microsoft no longer recommend that. They say the world is flat. So instead, every single communication site, every single team site is its own standalone site collection. So that means, in effect, you'll have hundreds of little islands of sites, and what you need is something that pulls them all together again, and that's what the hub site does. It helps with the navigation by pulling things together. It's also modern, so you'll see the image on the right. It's mobile friendly. You can go to a hub site, and it's a fully responsive design. And there's lots of speculation that maybe, just maybe, a hub site is starting to look much closer to a typical intranet homepage, and that could be where hub sites are going. One of the ways that Microsoft have kind of explained the benefits of hub sites is with this rather complicated view, but focus on the orange squares. So those are hub sites. You've got HR, you've got sales, you've got EMEA for Europe and Middle East, and then you've got blue team sites and green communication sites attached. Now imagine that you change your mind about where EMEA sales fits, the piggy bank one down here, and said, we don't want it to be part of EMEA, we want everything to report into sales. In the past, if that was part of a site hierarchy, it would be quite messy to untangle it and attach it to sales. But now the world is flat, you just associate it with the sales hub site instead, and in just a few minutes, you've in effect restructured the relationship between the site and your intranet. So that's the big advantage of doing it from a practical point of view. Chris, tell us how to get one of these fine hub sites.
Okay, so there isn't anything in particular that's special about a hub site when it starts its life. It's just a team or a communication site. And I think in 95% of the cases, you might expect communication site to be the right choice here. And that's just because of the kind of layouts and widgets that you can get on a communication site. When you think about what a hub is providing, that's probably the more logical choice rather than a team site, but it can be either. So the first step is to create your team or communication site, and then there's an admin step where some PowerShell is executed, which registers this site with Office 365 as a hub site. And you need an administrator of your Office 365 environment to do that. And they run the command register SPO hub site and provide the URL of the site that you've created. Now, at this point, we have a hub site, and now other sites can be associated with it. Now, this is something that other site owners throughout the business, they can do themselves. So they get some user interface controls, and it's also possible through PowerShell with a command called add SPO hub site association. But this is the step where some existing sites or a site that you're creating at that time can be associated with one of these hub sites. And that's really all there is to it in terms of creating a hub site and then joining some sites to it.
You know, when you talk about PowerShell, I'm reminded of being a kid and watching TV shows where they tell you how to make something and say, at this point you need scissors, so get an adult to help. And so someone says PowerShell, and we're like, oh God, I'll get someone more technical to help. But it's not a big job, is it, once you've got PowerShell set up? But
no, that's right.
Not something that your average site owner, editor would necessarily want to do themselves.
No, most likely not.
Yeah. All right, great. So let's have a look at some of the capabilities, and we've just got 3 slides to give you an overview, and then we'll go into a live demo. But the list of what hub sites can do is, first of all, it can aggregate all the news and activity from the associated sites. So if you, for example, have got that sales site as the kind of the sales hub, and underneath it you've got 7 regions, the news on the Sales Hub will pull all of the news from the subsites in there. So it gives you that dashboard view of what's going on. You don't have to include every single subsite. So it might be that you've got maybe a sensitive sales site that you don't want everyone to see, and you could deselect that. And it's probably worth saying also that any kind of security settings you have on an associated site are preserved, so that the hub site won't overrule and make things visible that otherwise wouldn't be visible. It adds global navigation, so you get a horizontal menu strip. So you could, for example, use that so that wherever you go in the family of site, people see the same like reference menu at the top. You can also impose a single brand and theme, so all the same colors, all the same logo, and all of these, of course, are building consistency, so that that sense of the 7 sales sites all being part of some bigger collective. So you need to be aware, and we'll come on to this, that the fact that the site design, you know, if someone's got an orange sales site and all the others are blue, that will change when it associates with it. And the search also gets scoped. So if I go into the hub of sales and put in a customer name, and the information only resides in the Sales Asia site, it will appear in the search results. So that's great, because often people intuitively, they don't really understand search filtering, but they do get the idea that if I navigate to the sales area and search, I would expect to see everything in sales. In the same way in Amazon, if I navigate to home and garden and then do a search, I wouldn't expect to see books. I'd only expect to see home and garden things. Now, because hub sites are based on either a communication or a team site, then anything you could do in one of those sites remains possible within hub sites. Chris, back to you.
Okay, so if we think about news in particular, there are, some aspects to be aware of when we're working with news, and this really is an important function of hub sites. So right now, there are a couple of options for news, and when I'm working with the control which provides this, which is just effectively a highlighted content control, I can select some items for the scope. So I can say that news should just be rolled up from this site, or it should be a selection of sites. But more likely when I'm working with a hub, I'm going to choose this new option of all sites in the hub. And it's this configuration that lets the hub site owner provide this hub scoped roll up of all the content that we want. And this applies to a few web parts. And we get a special layout of news articles that is basically called the hub news layout. And this does some special things, like it displays the originating site that the news article came from. So when I'm a user looking at the hub, I get a good sense of the fact that some articles are coming from a HR subsite that's pay and benefits, or some others are coming from the performance site, and I get a view of where the content is actually coming from. Now, we'll also get some more features to this aggregation of news in the future. So we'll be able to pin news articles at the hub level. So if we've got a steady stream of new content being generated and we want some things pinned so that they're sticky, we'll be able to do that. And there'll be other options around a compact layout so that we can display more articles in the same amount of space. There'll be a carousel and various options for how we want to present the articles. So that's news, and certainly that's a useful feature of hubs. Now, in terms of navigation, hub sites play an important role here too. So we get this layer of hub navigation, and there's a few things that you can do with this. The main goal here is that you can provide consistent navigation across all of the sites within the hub. So if we have 20 sites within a HR area, they can all have the same top level navigation, and that allows users to navigate through the sites and find the things that they want. They'll always be able to go back up to the hub, and you can even do other things like perhaps these hub navigation things. You might want to add a link to your top level intranet homepage across each of these. So if you end up in a big organization and you've got 10 or 20 hubs, one thing that's consistent about them is that they all allow you to easily get back up to the intranet home that you might have that's the umbrella over everything. Other features,
Sorry, Chris, we had a quick question from Matthew who can just put in. Thank you, Matthew. Does the common navigation persist through the SharePoint mobile app?
Yes, it does. So when you're on a hub site, you'll be able to navigate around and the hub navigation shows there too. Yeah. But it provides some other things like a sense of place through having a logo. So you can see in my image here that my hub navigation layer, that has its own logo, but the site that I'm in also has a logo to represent what it's about. So I'm in the My HR hub, but I'm also in the performance site. So as I go through other sites within this hub, my HR would stay the same, and I really do get a sense of where I am in my overall structure of sites, as well as the actual logo for the site. Now, we do need to understand the way navigation works, that these are effectively manually picked links. It's sort of like a hand-curated structure to navigation. And it's up to the hub site owner to decide what links should be in that navigation set. They're not security trimmed, so you can basically have full power. The content of a hub site is security trimmed. So in terms of the news articles that you might see, or the documents that you'd see, or any other content that's coming from search across the hub, well, that is security trimmed. But navigation is really just a set of hand-picked links that you have full control over and you can do whatever you want with. All right, so with that, I think let's move towards a demo so we can bring some of this stuff to life. Okay, and I'm just going to switch to my browser. Okay, so I'm looking at a page which is actually our Fresh products. Now, this is effectively the overall corporate intranet, but it provides a way for me to access lots of the things that I might need to get to in Office 365. So it's a typical intranet landing page. I've got my own sort of roll-up of tools and news. I can see news from across the intranet. I can see tools. I can see recent documents that I've worked with through the graph and items that I should read later. And I've also got like a nice handy roll-up of this that some clients are choosing to use. So I can have a nice way of getting to perhaps my recent documents or tasks in Planner, or perhaps teams that I'm working in, and so on. So I can quickly access all of the things that I might need to in Office 365. Now, this is relevant because as we build out our site structure and we start to use hubs, we do need something that is listing our hub sites or providing access at the top level, so I can understand as a user what hub sites are in use in my organization, because they might allow me to get to sites and content underneath that. So in Fresh, we have this area called Collaborate, or sometimes we call it the Sites Hub, depending on how the client likes to tailor the product. But here you can see in the middle zone, I have a list of hub sites. I also am showing things like group sites, Microsoft Teams. I've got some communication sites and some project sites. But the important thing is that you will need to think about some way of getting towards the hub sites. And here, for example, if I start doing a particular search, then I can sort of drill down and find items that match this result. So if I go to my consulting hub site, so in this case, I'm representing a division, and I've chosen a communication site, and I've started to populate it with content. And this is really to reflect a whole division of the organization, and we expect that certain sites come underneath it. Now, to think about the navigation, you can see my hub navigation across the top. And if I'm the hub site owner, I can edit these links, and I can just very simply add a new link here. I can say that this is an images library that might be relevant to everywhere. I type in the actual link, and you can see that with sort of very little effort, I get to edit my hub site navigation. That will be visible across all of the sites in the hub, but hopefully you get the point that this is a manually managed thing.
So it's very similar to quick links in a modern team site then, isn't it, the way that bit works?
It is, and it's designed, I think, not to be super complex and not to have some complex algorithm behind it. You know, you as the hub site owner have full control there.
And how many layers deep can you go in the menu to create a kind of mega menu feel to it?
Yes, you can do that. You can go to 3 levels of depth.
But it's going to be a cascading menu in the same way
That's
that Teams like ones are.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And certainly if you want to go beyond that or choose a different approach, then if you have development skills and a developer or a development team or partner that can build in the SharePoint framework, then you can build an SPFX extension and basically apply it to all of your sites and get the exact navigation behavior that you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay, so on this hub site, I've got some widgets. So I've got some promoted links at the top in the hero web part. I've got some news. I've got a list of the sites that are beneath it, and I've got some events and documents and so on. Now the thing is, right now, these are all showing content only from the division itself, only from the hub, and not from the associated sites. Now, I guess what I want to show is that as the hub site owner, you can edit this page. And if we pick the news web part, I can come in here, I can change the source, and I can change it from just this site to all sites in the hub. And I can use the hub news layout or one of the others if I like. Now, the important thing is that now my news area is showing content from across the hub, and I'm now seeing articles from Consulting France, Consulting UK, as well as news from the consulting division itself. And I think this is the config that you would most likely want to use. And perhaps we'll reflect the same in the documents web part, where again, just right now, the source that's being used is this site collection. But again, in this mode, I can change the highlighted content web part to use all sites in the hub as the source. And now you'll see that documents web part updating. And now I've got content from the hub site itself, but also Consulting France, Consulting UK, and so on. And I think that's really the power of hub sites. I get to bring things in from all over the sites that comprise the hub. And of course, I get to search. So my search box, even you can see without even doing a search, it's providing some useful suggestions. And this is scoped to everything within the hub. So all of the associated sites are covered in this scope. Now, I think the other thing I was thinking about showing is, we're talking about this process of creating a new hub site and what that looks like. So really, that's just as simple as creating a new communication site, which I can do from the SharePoint homepage here. So I'll come here and I'll click Create Site. I'll select communication site because we think that's the most useful sort of template to use for one of these sites. And in this case, in fact, what I'll do is I'll just simulate creating a new communication site and joining it to an existing hub. So let's say that our consulting hub is becoming a great success, and we've got other teams throughout the business that start to want their own site and want to be part of this hub. So we'll call this site Consulting Germany. It's representing that team within the business. So SharePoint Online is going to create my communication site.
While it's doing the creation bit, Chris, shall we take a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure.
So Tara asks, is there a limit to how many sites can be affiliated with a single hub site?
That's a good question. So I don't think there's a limit to the number of sites that can be associated, but people might know and should know that there is a limit to the number of hub sites themselves. Now that limit is currently 50 per organization, but I think we can expect Microsoft to expand that as hub sites roll out and become more popular in the service and Microsoft continue to evolve the capabilities of hub sites. I think we'll be able to go beyond 50 hub sites, but I don't think there's a limit on the number of sites that can be associated with the hub itself.
Yeah, so the pattern with Microsoft is that they're normally quite cautious in how much load they let you put on the Office 365 servers until they've had it in the wild for a while, and then they raise the bar, don't they, once they get more confident about what they can handle. So
that's right.
I don't think there's any absolute limit to 50. They've just done that as a load.
Indeed, it's not. Yeah, it's not a hard limit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we created that site, we created Consulting Germany, and really just to show that as the site owner or somebody that can edit this site, I can come into the site settings and I can choose to associate it with one of my hubs. It's a simple drop-down list, and I can choose that I want to associate with the consulting division. And what that should do, you might notice that this site had some blue elements. That was the theme that was used. Well, once I've associated with the consulting hub, which has a theme of orange, we should see the accent color be updated to orange, and I should get the global navigation at the top level, including my recently added images library. You see the orange theme that's been picked up. And so, creating a new site and joining it to a hub is really that simple. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Okay, so site designs. Now, site designs are a capability where with some technical effort, and this doesn't need to be a pro developer. This is something that perhaps somebody that's familiar with basic script or XML or JSON, they might be able to work with a site design. And we've got all sorts of capabilities for customizing the SharePoint site at a lightweight level. So perhaps all of the sites in a hub, they should have a couple of lists or libraries, and we want to have consistency like that. Maybe we want to do other things like apply a theme or add some navigation links to the site, and this is at the site level, not the hub site level. Perhaps we want to install some other add-ins or extensions that we've had a development team build, so maybe some kind of custom header or footer or global navigation control, or maybe we want to just do some other things, something that we could accomplish with a flow, and that includes applying a more complex template that perhaps a development team created using the patterns and practices or the PMP approach to tailoring SharePoint sites. Now, overall, what we're able to do is just use site designs to get consistency across all of our sites in the hub, and that list of actions that you can take there, well, that represents the things I can do. And no code is involved here. It's really just JSON, and in fact, you're kind of editing some technical definition of the site, but it isn't actually code, and it's a nice way of bringing consistency to all my sites within a hub. Now, site designs come to hub sites in a couple of different ways. So it's possible that if I create a site from a certain template, I can auto-join a hub. So maybe I could create a site design for finance sites, and then if a site gets created using this design, it can auto-join the finance sites hub. And that can be useful because then as these things get created through the business, I don't need to rely on a site owner doing the right thing and making the association in the right way. I've handled it for them, and there's not too many mistakes that they can make. And it works the other way around too. So when a site is associated with a hub, I can apply a site design then, and this is where I've got the option of perhaps adding some tools into the site, whether it's lists and libraries or content types or navigation, just anything that really needs to be added to the site to make it consistent with the other sites within the hub. So this is really quite powerful if I've got a certain set of templates and widgets and functionality that all the sites within a hub should be capable of. A couple of things to look out for is that if I'm using hub sites across my intranet and my set of SharePoint sites, any site owner can associate their site with any hub by default. And that might be okay in a small organization, but perhaps in a large multinational enterprise, maybe you want to think about adding some control and governance to that. Now, Microsoft have thought of this, and there's a command that you can use to lock down who can associate a site to a site hub. And this is another PowerShell command. It's grant SPO hub site rights, and that means that I could tie down who can associate to what hub. So as my example there, perhaps only finance users can associate sites to the finance hub. And that gives me perhaps more control and more governance to how my structure of hub sites and sites ends up.
Chris, we're getting loads of questions coming in, so maybe we should move on to the Q&A. there's a whole group around hierarchies of hub sites and so on. So David, for example, says, can the comms site be associated with more than one hub site?
No, so there is a one-to-one mapping there. So I should say that a site can only belong to one hub. Now that requires an element of planning, because perhaps you've got a site that has some high value content, and really you would like it to appear, some of that content to appear in multiple hubs and not just one. Now it is actually possible in the Microsoft model to do that. So all you'd really need to do is where the content should appear on a second, third or fourth hub, those sites, we should have some configuration of the web parts where we're hand picking the sites that content is coming from. So perhaps they don't have the config where I just show all the content that's coming up from sites associated with this hub. Maybe in that case, I need to hand pick. And so we actually have this flexibility where content can be displayed on multiple hubs, so long as I configure my web parts in the right way.
Yeah, so for example, you can use the highlighted content web part on any modern page, and that lets you pick the news source for n different sites, doesn't it? So they don't have to be part of this hub that content web part appears on.
That's right, yeah.
Also, can't remember who asked it, apologies, but someone said, and can you have a hub site belonging to other hub sites, Lucas? So you create a hierarchy of hub sites. And I'm afraid, Lucas, no, the answer is no. So it's a strictly two-layer thing at the moment. The hub site is at the top, and then any number of sites can be associated below it, but you can't have a hub site pointing into another hub site in the current model.
That's right.
And Liz asks us how much branding you can add. So I think, Liz, what we demonstrated is about it. So you can add a logo and you can add a color palette using the theme, but really any other changes beyond that, I think Microsoft are trying to discourage, because you then run the risk of clashing with changes that Microsoft might make to the page layout themselves as they roll out new functionality or change, for example, the Office 365 navigation bar. Is that right, Chris?
Yes, effectively. Now I can do things that go beyond what we've shown. So I could deploy a custom theme in this modern theming approach, which my sites within a hub can use. And I do have a certain level of branding control there. I can control colors and fonts, and I could probably do some extra things as well, add headers and footers and so on. Now there are just some zones of the page that I don't have full control of. And this is one of the aspects of modern sites, as you say, Sam, where Microsoft are trying to steer people away from heavy customization of some of those elements so that they have control over the Office 365 service and how it runs. So it isn't that we get full control of the page necessarily, and it could be a little less branding control than we used to. But generally, you can achieve a lot with the right kind of approach and the right skills.
And building on that, Margaret says, I've seen good examples of comms and hub sites, but they all look the same to me. Do we lose creative control over the interface? To some extent, I think you do. I mean, SharePoint circa 2007, it really was like the website builder approach, where whatever you wanted you could have with enough time and paracetamol. But now it's much more like an off-the-shelf product where if you go for it, then you live with its constraints in the same way you live with the Excel and Word interface. I mean, Chris, yeah. What's your take on that?
I think that's a really good observation, and I agree that's probably a good summary. And this can be a reason why the combination of hub sites and communication sites right now, they might not be the best choice for every organization to use as their main approach to intranet. We certainly speak to some organizations that the brand is a really big factor for them, and it's a strong consideration, and they really want to apply their brand to their intranet sites. And sometimes this isn't possible with communication sites right now. So, for an organization with really strong brand requirements like that, they do need to analyze these options carefully. And if they decide that communication sites and hub sites aren't quite the thing, well, maybe they still need to use SharePoint publishing sites. And that's the approach that we use in Fresh to have the right level of control at the moment, and we're keeping a watching brief on where things go with communication sites and hub sites and so on. But for now, some organizations need that level of control.
And many of the conversations we're having with clients right now is when they bump their head against the limitations of communication sites, and there are many of them, it comes down to saying, well, you can have what you want, but then we switch to publishing sites, and bear in mind, they don't work as well, anywhere near as well on the mobile experience at the moment. There'll be a cost to produce it at the start, and there might well be costs further down the line as other changes come that won't be compatible with it. So SharePoint still retains that ability to customize and adapt, but it definitely comes with some enduring risk, I think, to do it that way.
Yeah, and I would say to a certain extent that depends on how it's implemented. And for example, if organizations were looking at intranet products that are built on SharePoint, some of them should have given good thought to how to handle this in a safe way so that customizations are done in the right way, and also that they solve those problems of working well on a mobile device, and you get the same level of responsive design that modern sites have, but
yes,
yet you've still got a greater degree of control of the page.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Chris, I've got an eye on the clock. So we do have some questions about news, and we've got a slide on news. So let me move on to talk about when to use hub sites. So from a comms point of view, the main use case I see is as like a home for departments or functions. So if you've got like a global HR department, you might use a hub site as the entry point for that, and then have team sites for admin, payroll, learning, development, recruitment underneath. And they all get consistent branding, and any kind of news or changes happening in the individual team sites would roll up into the HR department one, so people would get a quick overview of what's happening. You could also use it, for example, as a program portal. So it's quite common if you've got a big project that is a number of work streams. Each work stream would have their own team site, but your stakeholders might want a place to go into as an entry point to say, okay, what's the overview of this? I don't want to see every single document and every single activity, but I would like to see a roll-up of the current status and maybe the quarterly progress reporting, that kind of stuff. Similarly, for employee reference, you might have a hub site, which is your entry point for policies or guidelines or templates, and then underneath that, a set of more specialist sites that cover off different areas. This is, to me, where something like the scope search really comes to the fore. You might not know if a policy sits in regulatory or legal or health and safety, and you don't have to know if the search can cover off health and safety, legal, regulatory as subsites. And the last one I thought of is an events portal. So imagine you run a whole series of projects that might only last for a month. Each one of those could have its own team site, and then it would be nice to use a hub site to say, what are the current 10 events we've got going on at the moment and what's happening in those, and then I can drill down into the specific ones. So one of the questions that came in, I think, from Liz was, how much curation can you have around rolling up news into the hub site to do this? At the moment, the answer is very little. So any news that's created in an associated site will appear in the hub news. What a lot of people are waiting for is that pinning functionality that Chris mentioned that allows you to get a little bit more curation and say, my big announcement shouldn't get bumped down the queue when a small announcement happens in a subsite saying there's going to be a cake sale. So the pinning will let you do that. But Chris, I don't think there's a way to put any more workflow around it at the moment, is there, to trigger like an approval for an individual news story coming out of a subsite?
Not yet. No, you're right to say that if the article is created in a site within the hub, it will get rolled up. Now, it's also worth remembering that more is coming from Microsoft on this. So you'll often hear them talk about organizational news and capabilities around that. So that will encompass the pinning functionality, also the ability to perhaps nominate certain sites as news sites, and maybe you could exclude others from the hub as not being sites that generate news. And you'll start to get more control, and you'll be able to do more on metadata and filtering and targeting, and perhaps get more control from how news works in team and communication sites right now.
Yeah, we just had a question coming from Kevin saying, can you tag pages and filter on that basis? So you can use properties of the news story, such as the title or the metadata, to filter what appears in the hub. The limitation today is that from a news creator point of view, it's quite hard to add that metadata to the page. But Microsoft demonstrated that last month as a much easier way of seeing the page metadata that would let you say, for example, this is an urgent announcement, and therefore it goes through into the hub, whereas a minor announcement, you might say, doesn't roll up into the hub.
Yeah.
And Chris, tell us about the collaboration side for hub sites.
Yeah, so I think another scenario is where you're trying to introduce some structure to a whole bunch of collaboration sites or team sites. So in this case, you know, Microsoft have steered us away from subsites in recent times, and that certainly makes sense. But the problem perhaps with just having a flat list of sites that represent all your team sites is that you do need to impose some structure and grouping onto that. And now this is one of the scenarios which hub sites, you know, can be really useful. So anything that's a scenario like the ones I list there, maybe you've got divisions and departments or clients and projects, a region and business units, you know, hub sites are really good at grouping your large list of team sites, and we work with some organizations that have tens of thousands of team sites. So, you know, you do want something like this to bring them together into logical units.
Okay, great. So to kind of summarize the difference between hub, communication, publishing, and team sites, I put this table together. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read it all out, but the gist of hub sites is that they're about connecting and clustering other sites. They're not necessarily for putting content in the hub that only exists in the hub. Com sites are best for single topic microsites, but what I mean is so a single event, a single department. Team sites best when everybody's also contributing, rather than just maybe one person publishing and another consuming. And publishing sites are the old school one that give you loads of flexibility, typically one or two authorized publishers and everyone else reading. And if you want all the things you're asking for around complex brand and workflow or complex navigation, then don't forget publishing sites are still there. They're just, they're not as modern in their look and they're not as friendly to live with. I'm trying to, there we go. So we've got a few limitations and gotchas that also relate to some of the questions that are coming in. So to reiterate, a site can only be associated with a single hub site. So I think a good tip is to decide up front what your hub grouping principle is going to be. So for example, you might say if we're doing it by function, then we'll have an HR hub, and France, Italy, and Wales, all of those HR sites will point into the single hub. Or you could say, no, we're going to do it by country, so we'll have one for France, and HR, finance, and IT for France will all point into the single France hub. The point is, if you don't have that principle up front, and some people do it geographically and some people do it by function, it's going to become really hard for people to predict where they should go to drill down to a specific site, because sometimes they might go to Italy and not find finance, but they go to France and they do find finance. It's not a technical limitation, it's a design choice, and it's a good design choice to make up front. Chris, over to you.
Yep, so we've previously talked about the limit of, as we're saying, it's not a hard limit, it's more of a recommendation, but it's there for good reason, of 50 hub sites per organization. So you need to factor that into your planning. And you know, I think lots of these aspects of hub site planning do come back to what you're saying there about deciding on the principle for what a hub site should represent. I think, you know, once you've established that, then some of these things should inform some of your other decisions and considerations here. We should also remember that just when a site joins a hub, there is no change to the permissions of the site itself. So I noticed that come in as a question. And that's important to know, that just by associating a site with a hub, nothing is changing in terms of permissions. So you need to do some careful planning and perhaps testing around the links that you're adding to navigation and considering who can access the sites and so on. You wouldn't want to add a link into your hub site nav that in fact lots of your user base can't access, because you'll probably get some help desk calls around that. Just to flip that one around whilst we're on it, perhaps you could have a strategy where you are doing that, but you're perhaps adding the word restricted or something like that to the link. So you're saying, you know, executive area restricted, and the idea being that perhaps it's something that you want people to be aware of, and then maybe there's a process for requesting access to that site. But, you know, the deal with hub sites and joining is that you're not changing the permissions. You need to deal with that separately. You are changing the theme, and you know, you get the benefits of navigation and search roll-up and aggregation and so on, but not permissions. Okay. And just then thinking about some other things. So, and this, I noticed another question coming around this, and this was around, can we associate classic team sites to a hub? And as you can probably infer from the point here, yes, you can, but there's a caveat. So a classic team site can be associated with a hub site, but take care, because the hub navigation will only appear on modern pages, because that's how SharePoint is architected in terms of hub sites and the page layouts. So if, for example, you have a team site and the home page of that team site is still a classic page, well, you'll have no hub site navigation there. And so that could be a confusing user experience. So, you know, take care with that one. Yes, you can associate classic sites, but just understand what that user experience will be like. Other caveats and gotchas. So if you're using the forthcoming multi-geo capability of SharePoint, and this is really an IT architecture consideration, where perhaps I'm a big multinational company and I've got SharePoint tenants effectively in different locations that are all sitting under one overall tenant, but I'm basically placing sites near users. So I might have a US region and an EMEA region and so on. Just understand that you can only associate sites from the same geolocation in SharePoint if you are using that functionality. And I'd expect that to be a very small number of organizations to begin with, because that's something that's only becoming available soon. And then the final one was this idea that anybody can join a hub by default, any site owner, but you can restrict it. And that's often sensible to do so by using grant SPO hub rights.
Okay, so a few more questions coming in about corporate comms and can you use it as an intranet for a small company? So let's try and tackle that one. So to reiterate, up until now, pretty much every internet homepage I've ever seen has been built on a publishing site. And that's allowed lots of flexibility about the appearance, but it's also taken extra work. Com sites are a start, but they still lack a lot of things that you would probably want for an intranet homepage. So this idea of a news center where you have all the news in one place, but you might publish out to different areas, it's almost inverted with the modern model. So instead, what Microsoft is saying is that you will create the news as a set of pages within maybe 5 communication sites, and then they try to pull these scattered news together to present it into one place, which might be a hub site or highlighted content. So that makes it harder for a kind of corporate comms mindset of saying, we'd like to have a long list of all our news stories and see when they were published and who by. You also can't move news around. So you couldn't say, for example, today we want this news story to be the hero image, tomorrow we want it to be a thumbnail story, and next week we want it to just be the text headline. There's no kind of fading away of news stories. It's much more of a manual republish. And also one that we're coming up with a lot with is this idea of syndicating or targeting. So you can't say for this user who works in Spain, we'll get hooked up on France, in Spain, filter out all the news stories that are relevant to Spain. But when someone in Germany goes to the same page, filter out only showing the stories that are German. There's no filtering or kind of targeting available at the moment. And all of this, as we learned, means that the governance is really very limited. It's much more of a kind of everyone having a lot of power and a lot of capabilities, and then using the modern mindset to tie things together again. Not quite wiki style, but much closer to a wiki than we've had with traditional publishing sites. And lastly, for me, for larger organizations, There's no support at all for multiple languages, and that is again something that we see added in by a lot of in-a-box products or bespoke builds. Adding in hub sites, well, you get basic navigation, but you don't get a nice mega menu. So for a large-ish intranet site, that's going to be a limitation. And until we get pinning, there really isn't any ability to curate news either. So Microsoft have promised us more. Do you want to take us through what's coming in May, Chris?
Sure. So at the SPC conference in May, there were a bunch of announcements ranging from things like SharePoint Spaces, which is the effectively the augmented reality capability coming to SharePoint, and that's very interesting ways of visualizing complex content or perhaps a complex process. Very bold of Microsoft, I think, to go heavy in that area, and we'll see how that pans out over the next couple of years, but certainly exciting stuff there. But then there was a list of announcements for things perhaps a bit more relevant in the intranet space rather than collaboration. And this does solve some of the challenges when these things land, but perhaps not all. So we've mentioned previously that metadata and filtering, they'll come, so I can have more control over how I tag my pages and where they appear, and I don't have to use some of the workarounds that perhaps some organizations have been forced to go with up to date. I get some targeting capabilities, and this, if you're a SharePoint person, this isn't based on audiences or any of the previous models. This is a near real-time capability for targeting content based on a user's division or their business unit or their country or some other aspect of their user profile. Organizational news, where I've got some additional capabilities for saying where news comes from and how it should be curated. Some stuff around the mobile app that's getting some exciting updates, and then some other things like content approvals and save for later. And Microsoft have also talked about just core enhancements to SharePoint in terms of lists and libraries, and some really useful things there, considering they're such a cornerstone of SharePoint. And it's just going to be easier to create lists and create from Excel and existing templates. We've got this idea of real-time updates, so no need to refresh the page, so people could use a list more like a dashboard, and lots of related things around Power BI integration and so on. So, Microsoft continuing to push hard.
Yeah. So with all that coming, do you still need an intranet in a box, be it Fresh or one of the many other ones that we review? Well, I think I would refer you back to that slide about, does it replace an intranet now? Probably. If you are maybe an organization of 100 people or less and in one language and one country, then just about with a hub site. You'd be living with a fair few limitations, but I don't think they are insurmountable. Of course, all the vendors of these products know that hub sites and comp sites have been coming, and they've all been working hard to integrate them and add extra value. So I think we're a long way off replacing corporate intranets with what Microsoft has, but these are very nice tools for maybe the next tier down. So we've only got a couple of minutes left for Q&A. While you think of your questions and we review what's coming in, let me just tell you about an offer from both companies. So from ClearBox, we produce an annual report called SharePoint Intranets in a Box. The 2018 edition covers 34 in-depth reviews. They're all independent. Nobody pays us to do the reviews and say nice things about them, and it's over 430 pages. So if you are interested in buying one of these products, it's a real good way of getting a quick start to come up with a short list from 34 plus options down to maybe 5 or 6 that are really suitable. Use the code FRESHWEBINAR to get 10% off for that.
And from us, we'd like to offer effectively a strategy assessment, so we can come in and help you understand what your priorities might be and what a roadmap might look like. We'll basically talk to you about Fresh and capabilities in Office 365, and perhaps understand how it might look like for your organization, and also what an implementation project would look like for you. And we'll work together with you to give you some mock-ups of our product with your branding and content and perhaps some tools that you need in there. And you'll basically get a high-level implementation plan that can help you decide whether we're the right partner and the right technology for you.
Great. So quick fire question round. Philip, are there any instances where a site cannot be associated with a hub site?
No, not technically. So long as you have permissions to associate to that hub, then you can associate any site, whether it's a communication site, modern team site, or classic team site, to a hub.
And a publishing site?
Publishing site, no. So there is no real link.
Yes, link to it, and I guess that's it, isn't it?
That's it. You know, there's not really going to be a lot that comes from that. So, you know, that's not really something that you do. Great question though, and not one I'd actually thought of. But no. Yeah, that's not really where you can go with hub sites, unfortunately.
And Sohail, a newly associated site doesn't automatically get added to the global nav, correct? So that's right, Sohail. Although you associate a site to the hub, you still manually have to put the link into that menu bar at the top.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And Liz, if you associate hub sites to the homepage, will the homepage style be applied to all hubs?
So really, what happens there is that the theme gets applied to sites in the hub. So it depends on really which aspects of the homepage you're thinking about, but the theme is something that really applies throughout the site, not just on the homepage, and it's that's propagated down to the sites in the hub.
And we'll end with Rochelle's question: can a hub site feed to other hub sites, such as corporate hub sites feed to other location sites? No, not really.
Well, yes, that's an interesting question. So, well, you know, I think we're both right. So, no, not really is the true answer when you think about how these web parts work and how hub sites work. I guess what you could do is work around that with some clever configuration of your website, of your web parts, where one particular hub site isn't configured to roll up content from sites within this hub, but you're perhaps hand picking sites, and what you're picking there is other hub sites. So you could kind of hand crank your own aggregation of one hub site getting content from other hub sites, but you know, you'd have to do some special things in the web parts and select the right options and line some things up to achieve that. By default, that's not how hub sites and the web parts work, but I don't think that's a hard blocker so long as you understand the web part options.
So there you go, Rochelle. The developer answer is yes, with some really clever work, and the Intranet manager answer from me is no, don't try it, because that sounds really risky. We shall leave it there. Chris, that's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much to everybody joining us. Really appreciate you tuning in. Sorry we couldn't get through all the questions. There were some really great ones asked, but hopefully we covered most of them. And we'll see you all next month. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.